post that online for family members to be able to see. I give it to a select group, and so it's not broadcast worldwide or anything like that. But turn to John chapter 4, and we'll begin at verse 4, reading. Today being the third Sunday of Lent, a season of remembering the sufferings of Jesus, and actually a celebration of the resurrection. Each time you observe and think about Lent, I did do some, in the course of the week, read different times, trying to read the origins of Lent, and there's about as many opinions as there is people that can write about it. Anyway, sometime maybe we'll get into that, possibly some of the origins of Lent, in the impact in the design of it. So Palm Sunday will be April the 9th. That's when Lent ends. And then, of course, Easter will be on the 16th, April the 16th. But today, looking at the story of the Samaritan woman and the encounter with Jesus, I've done some readings, done various things that have captured my attention by various readers. Dr. Chris Green in particular did a reflection on this passage, and so I'll be borrowing from some of his work today in our observance of this. But when we think about Lent and we think about looking forward toward the resurrection, when we think about the life of Christ leading up to the time that he was on the cross, his life, as Christians, as believers in Christ, we share in his life, his death, and his resurrection. I want to highlight and raise the one thing that we sometimes, or at least I know that I have not thought as much about. The impact of his life, in the sense that I would the death on the cross and the resurrection, and so the two are not separated. But as a Christian, we share in that. We are connected to that. That story is we share in that story because the way that Christ lived out, the way that Christ did all those things that he did, we share in that. And so anyway, let's begin reading through the text here. We'll read for just a bit, and then we'll take time to elaborate on what we're reading. Verse 4, but he needed to go through Samaria. Verse 5, so he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, therefore, being wearied or tired from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God, and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And the woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? And Jesus answered and said to her, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. And the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. And Jesus said to her, Go call your husband and come here. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, You have said, well said, I have no husband, or you tell the truth. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband, and that you spoke truly. And the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Mm-hmm. Giving some reflections on and taking this, looking at this text, Pastor Williams several weeks ago spoke using this text, done a masterful job in presenting the text. What's interesting in this text, we see that Jesus has put himself in a position as a person in need, as he has presented himself to this woman who is coming to the well. It's interesting how that he was tired. It says he was wearied. He went to that place and he had a seat and he was waiting. He knew what was coming. He knew she was coming. And so as he's sitting there, he put himself in a position of dependency in his presentation to the woman. In other words, I'm depending on you to get a drink. What is so interesting about that is that he didn't really need it. He was life itself embodied, but yet he set the situation up so that he could offer at the end to the woman something that she needed. But yet he drew her into a conversation. What's also interesting, if you go in comparison to Exodus chapter 17, we have there the occasion where Moses was contending with the people, Israel, for their complainings and wanting water from the rock. Or that's what happens at that point. We didn't know that water was going to come from the rock until it came time. But let's look at verse 1 in Exodus chapter 17. It says, Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, Give us water that we may drink. So Moses said to them, Why do you contend with me, and why do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people complained against Moses and said, Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said to Moses, Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with with which you struck the river and go. And behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb. And you shall strike the rock, and water will come out, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. They were in a wilderness wandering and became thirsty, complaining, needing sustenance, needing something more than just water that came out of that rock, but that's all they had their minds on. The Samaritan woman, she needed a drink of living water, but she doesn't really know. You see the contention in the that she has with Jesus. Number one, not knowing who he was. Number two, we worship here. She was trying to set up that we worship at this place, you worship at another place, but for her, Jesus tore down her argument very quickly. Salvation is of the Jews. We know what we worship. And so it wasn't insulting, but it was putting her back on the path of what is right and what is true. She's wandering, doesn't know she's wandering. The children of Israel are wandering, and they know they're wandering. They know they need water. They're complaining, they're fussing, they're arguing, and going to blame Moses, going to be after Moses, want to possibly kill and stone Moses. Moses is feeling the heat of it. God provides a way for him to provide water. What's interesting that as you read, let's say as we just read for just a moment there, in verse 6 of Exodus, he says, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb." God was there. God arrived and met him there so that he could do this miracle. It's interesting, you see some of the similarities between the two. In the first case, when we think about the Samaritan woman, she was spiritually wandering, didn't know it. She comes to meet Jesus, and at the end of the story, she's no longer wandering, she's on a journey now. She's journeying with him. She was spiritually wandering and didn't know it. The people in the children of Israel that were complaining against Moses, they were wandering, and they were still wandering after the water had been supplied. They didn't enter into the journey. They were mad at Moses. They were mad at God, the God of Moses. They were mad, and they was going to make it known that they were mad. So as we continue on to the text, Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." Inasmuch as we read the similarities between the two, when Jesus asks for a drink of water, he is entrusting to the Samaritan woman, he is putting himself in the position to receive care from a stranger. He puts himself in the seat of, I'm at your mercy to get this drink of water. But at the end of the conversation and exchange of that day, he's going to offer her mercy. He made himself vulnerable. He didn't push. He didn't press. If anybody had the right to stand and to point his finger and lambaste anybody, it was him. But it's interesting, on every occasion, on most every occasion you see, he invites someone into the conversation by setting up the moment in some way, shape, form, or fashion. What's interesting how we, in this looking and in meditating upon this text and what is occurring, he is the water of life. He is the bread of life. Here we have a person who took the Creator took on creation. He subjugated himself. It was the plan of God to reach us. Think of where you were. Think of the moment that you received the salvation. You accepted salvation. You confessed on the Lord and you believed and were saved. Think about that moment. How tender that moment was, regardless of what may have set it up. God had no need, but he made himself needy. We find at the time of salvation, something was presented to us in such a way, hearing the gospel, the hearing of the word, the work of the Spirit, all this converging at the same time. And there is this desire in us, yes, this is what I need. This is what is going to satisfy the spiritual thirst and longing that I have in myself that only he can feel. Notice a lot of the play on words with feeling and drink and all these other things. In making himself dependent on others, you think that he made himself dependent on humanity in some way, in a way, because he was dependent on Mary. He made himself dependent on. He was dependent on in the home of Joseph. When he met John that day in the river, and John says, "Behold, the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Baptize me." "Oh, no, I need to be baptized of you." He submitted himself. "I need you to baptize me, John. I'm dependent on you to do this." Often that kind of approach draws in the other person into the conversation in such a way that the person is part of the dialogue in a much deeper level, rather than being preached to or pointed at the whole time. They are engaged in the situation. If you continue to read through the Gospels, you'll see that there are many times when he did this. He allowed himself to be dependent on other people. He asked the disciples, "Hey, I need you guys. Come and pray with me." And then there was the night in which the woman came and washed his feet with her